My name is Stewart Pisecco, and actually my day job used to be at the University of Houston. So I was a faculty member there for about 12 years and did research around kids with behavioral problems. But my first work is always with kids with behavioral problems. So when I start this and I talk to the superintendents and special ed directors and principals and teachers, I'll sometimes say, should there be an exclamation point there or a question mark? And sometimes people have different opinions about why there should be one versus the other. And before I start my talk today, I want you to think back about some of those teachers that were most influential for you. So think about a teacher that really made an impact on your education. And there are a lot of those folks here today. Now, I kind of felt ripped off that John wasn't my teacher in the 4th grade. I don't know about anyone else. Or Zach. So there's a lot of great teachers here. But think about those teachers that made a difference for you. And we'll come back to it. So when I started putting this together, I thought, I'll tell a story about when I was in grad school, right? So this was me in grad school, right? Actually, I didn't wear bow ties. Okay, this was me in grad school. I never had that. Good ball joke always breaks the ice.
Ball is beautiful.
That's right, we know. Yeah. But I did have a mirror. Someone took some pride in that. So I was in grad school, and I was doing my first real therapy practicum experience. I've been waiting for this one for a while, studied a lot of things, and I remember I got this kid, so this 12-year-old boy, and I thought, this is perfect. Couldn't wait for it. So I went in to meet Jake, and this is Jake. Now Jake's 12 years old, and a couple things to know about Jake. He's got 2 tattoos. Both of them were given to him by his brother, so that maybe tells you a little bit about the context of where he grew up. They weren't sleeve tattoos, those weren't in yet, but they were tattoos nonetheless. He was also drinking about a 5th of Jack Daniels a week. So this wasn't just your kind of run-of-the-mill kid who had some issues. This was a kid with serious behavioral issues. The other thing about Jake was because of his behavior, he was getting picked up by the police probably 2 or 3 times a month. And so this was my first introduction to working with kids with severe behavioral problems by myself. I worked in psychiatric facilities, I worked in a lot of other places, I worked in juvenile justice facilities, but this was the first one that I was fully responsible for. And this is what happened. Dad came, brought Jake to me and said, look, I'm overwhelmed, right? I can't handle this anymore. I don't know what to do. He's failing at school, mom took off, he's fighting all the time, he has all these issues. I need for you to fix them, right? Make this all better. Make Jake's problems disappear. That's why I'm bringing him here. And I thought, being 22, 23-year-old graduate student, no problem. I got this. We'll get the teachers on board. We'll get the systems in place. We'll get the parents on board. What we'll do is we'll create this cool system, right, where the kid can earn rewards and privileges for exhibiting different types of behaviors. And we'll do it so he can earn something like every day after school. And we'll do something so he can earn something like at the end of the week. And then this was a good one, we'll do something at the end of the month. Something really big. So I drew this all out, and I even drew up little tracking sheets for the parents to take home, because I thought they could put this on the board, send something home to the teachers. And I thought, I got this, no problem. And you know what? For a few weeks, that was like the best thing since sliced bread. Everything was going great, right? He's happier, he's doing great at school, Dad loves it. I'm thinking, I should be getting paid for this, I'm in grad school, I get free parking, that's about it. So when I would talk to Jake too, I said, Jake, what do you think about all this? Being kind of proud, everything's going on. He said, well, I really like it. Well, what about it do you really like, Jake? Well, people just don't nag me. And I thought, that's good, that's therapeutic progress. Right? Intrinsic motivation was a few steps down the road. We were just looking for him to see some positive consequence for engaging in positive behaviors. Because kids with behavioral problems are under-responsive to punishment and over-responsive to reinforcement. And that's where the challenge is when you work with kids with severe behavioral problems. Because the things you do for typical kids, even the threats you use, might actually kind of work on a short-term basis. But when you try that with a kid like Jake, it's like, I don't care. Do it, I don't care. But if you put positive reinforcement, positive rewards, positive incentives, catch them doing good, that's powerful to these kids. So 3 weeks later, Dad calls me And he says, well, old Jake's back. You know, he went out drinking, he got picked up by the police. You know all that stuff you're doing? Yeah, it's crap, it doesn't work. And now I'm a little stunned, right? So I tell him, look, you got to bring Jake in. And so I sit down with Jake. And I said, Jake, you know, what happened? You know, people weren't nagging you, remember how much you liked that? He said, yeah. He said, you know, I got all this stuff. I did everything I was supposed to do. I got this, you know, I got the stuff I was supposed to get at the end of the day. I got the stuff at the week. But you know how I was really working towards that monthly goal? Oh, yeah, I remember the monthly goal was my idea. Well, that was the one I was working towards. You know, I wanted to go to the mall with my friends. And my dad said I couldn't go. And I thought, oh, that's not true. That couldn't be true. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't undermine our success, would he? So I talked to Dad, and sure enough, it was true. And Dad said, look, I just didn't want to go to the mall, so I just told him no because I was afraid of smoking cigarettes. Of course, to me, I'm thinking to myself, if he's just smoking cigarettes, we've made progress, right? Because of all the other things he was doing. So at that point, I knew I had to start over. And what I knew was I had very limited control over the external world, right? Couldn't impact Dad that much, couldn't impact the teachers, couldn't impact his peers, but I could impact the relationship that I had with Jake. And I could be dependable for him. So that's what I took away. I need to create a dependable, caring, and engaged relationship with Jake. And maybe if I do that, it'll make a difference. Because I can control my relationship with him. This is a theme you've heard almost through every speaker, right? Every speaker says this. So I had the same realization. So that's what I did. And you know what I did was I just created, I made the system a lot more simple. I said, look, you know, you have a good day, you have a good day of the week, and that means not getting sent to the principal's office, and you do the things around the house you're supposed to. The first 30 minutes of therapy, your pick. You get to do anything you want. And most of the time we went out and just tossed the football back and forth. And if he did that for a month, then we went out and grabbed a slice of pizza. And so that's what I did, because I knew that's what I could impact. And it worked actually pretty well. And I remember one day I was out tossing football back and forth, and it was November, and this was in the Dallas area, so it was a little cold at that point. And I said, Jake, you cold? You want to go inside? And he said, no, I'm not cold. So we're tossing the football back and forth. And he said, are you cold? And I said, well, a little bit, but I'm okay. And he goes, no, if you're cold, let's go inside. And I thought, that was progress, right? You guys know that. How many people here know Jake? Go ahead, raise your hand. How many people here were Jake? Anyone? Sometimes my people show up. Especially as behavior people. But yeah, we all know Jake. Some of us hung out with them. Some of them were in our family. And what was interesting, when I look back on that experience with Jake, was I didn't realize at the time, was how often that scenario was going to be played out time and time and time again. Because what I ended up doing was I took a position at the University of Houston. I became a faculty member. And my research area is kids with behavioral issues. And I worked in the schools and I worked with teachers. And I would inevitably experience the same issue. And then as I get the call or the email, you know, the bat signal would go up. We have an issue. Bullying, assaults, suicide, gangs. Stewart, I need for you to come out here and fix it. It's really the same thing. A different issue and at a different scale. And the fact is there are a lot of people like me. A lot of people like me who work with kids with behavioral problems, and we can address those issues. But what we all know, what every one of us know, that if we do a better job of prevention, we can reduce crisis interventions. And that's what requires a shift if we're going to address behavior in an effective way in schools. A mind shift away from crisis management to prevention. So when I start thinking about this, I go out and talk about it, and you guys, there's a lot of you guys out here who know and have firsthand experience with teachers like that. But sometimes senior administrators aren't quite as aware of it. Because they'll say, well, we have a couple Jakes like that, but not that many in our schools. Not that many. We're lucky. Or some schools will say, we have quite a few Jakes, but we just don't have the time to do this. We don't have the time to put the preventative practices in place. So what I have to do a little bit is I have to orient people to how big of an issue it is. It's back to, does behavior matter? And what I'll say to folks is, this may be more of an issue than anything. When you look at the research literature, what percentage of kids in our schools have mental health issues? 1 in 5. About 20%. Is that about what you expected? A little lower, a little higher? Yeah. A little lower. Okay. And it depends on your schools. Some schools it may be higher. So if you think about this as 300 kids across 10 schools, right? So what that means is we have about 60 kids here who have some sort of mental health issue. And of the issues that they present with, 25% of them are ADHD. And you know those kids, right? We all know those kids. You walk into the class and you know those ones that struggle and they have to put practices in place. And then another 10% are defiant. And these are the kids that just won't follow your rules, your directions. And then you have also those kids that engage in antisocial behaviors. Jake, he was the kid who kind of did all 3 of those things. And you'll see that commonly. But what people don't realize as much is that of the kids in our schools, the kids that have issues, 15% are also depressed. Depression occurs at a much higher rate in children and adolescents than we ever thought. And what's also important to realize is the way depression manifests for adults is very different than the way it manifests for kids. And it's even different for adolescents than young kids. Young kids complain a lot about their stomachs and being upset, physical complaints. What's also interesting now, and it's surprising sometimes, is that 35% of the kids that have issues struggle with anxiety. And 50% of those kids also experience problems with depression. So we have a very large number of kids in our schools who suffer actually in silence. We don't think about those kids. We think about the kids that act out. And those are the ones that frustrate us. So I like to bring that to people's attention. Let's put this in perspective. According to our national data, only 1% of our student population are served through special ed as classified as having emotional and behavioral problems. 19% of those kids go unserved. 19% of the kids that have issues. And the impact of that on the teaching and learning environment, I don't have to tell you guys. You guys know that. It's significant. Now, what we also know is special education costs twice as much money to educate a kid in special ed than general ed, right? And if folks that are working in states where special ed budgets encroach on general ed, you hear that talked about a lot. What we also know is if we put those core practices in place around prevention, we can manage these kids very effectively and create very effective teaching and learning environments. I would venture to bet that a lot of the master teachers that are talking today do a lot of the things that we're going to talk about next. And it's why they're probably the ones who the principals say, hey, I want to put this kid with Zach. With Zach, he can handle these kids, or with John, or Sharon. Because they know how to deal with them, they know how to interact with them. It's almost seemed like we were talking about the Jedi's earlier. It's like some people are just kind of born with it, right? That's the way people think about behavior. When I think about working with kids, I go back to my experience with Jake. And I think what I would do, create dependable environments, caring environments. And if I do that well, I'll have engaged students. I'll have engaged adults. But it's really not enough to just tell people to do that. What you also have to do is help people understand what are the practices that they can put in place to create dependable, caring, engaged environments. And what we know from the research literature is that there are 6 indicators of a well-managed classroom. 6 indicators that create environments where everyone thrives. And when we think about the dependable group cluster, there are 3 of them: expectations, procedures, and structure. And what I mean by that is helping kids understand what we expect. Share with them the rules, don't keep it a secret. Creating routine for kids, we know is important. How we structure our environments is critical. Those 3 components I classify as part of the dependable spectrum of improving behavior. And then there's reinforcement, which Zach so perfectly described in his game that he talked about, or high-grade compliment. We talk about that as catching kids doing good. Teaching kids how to communicate that to themselves, to other people as well. How to interact effectively with kids is really important. And then how to correct misbehavior. And some people say, Stewart, why do you put corrections in the care? Because what are they thinking? They're thinking discipline. Right? Well, what we know, it's easy to care about kids who do everything right. It's hard to care about kids who do everything, or a lot of things wrong. So how we correct misbehavior when viewed through this lens makes a significant impact. So that kids don't see you as just punishment, disciplinary. They see you as a dependable, caring adult who follows through, who's consistent, who's engaged. Seems simple, right? And I really need 17 minutes for this. I'm going to just put this out there, going on. Why doesn't everyone do it? What I tend to find is that people naturally are inclined to one side or the other. You know, they really gravitate towards the dependable pieces. They really gravitate towards the caring pieces. Some people master both, right? But people have kind of a natural tendency to lean one way or the other. The other thing that makes this more complicated is, again, let's go back to our school. From the research literature, we know that our teacher preparation programs in college educations around the country, only 15% of them provide any sort of training around it. So out of those 10 teachers up here, how many of them know how to deal with the 60 kids? One. The other thing I want you to remember, that's one class they took when they were a junior in college. How much do you remember when we were junior in college? I remember fun times. I remember the teachers that told good stories. So teacher preparation around this is really deficient. And what we know today is that a lot of people are going through alternative certification programs, which provide even less training. So what can we do? Well, it's more than just training. Because what happens is people like me start talking, right? And they say, oh, that sounds pretty good. He's got some good stories. You can make that ball jig. I like the ball jig. We'll bring him in and we'll talk to my teachers and get this on the stage. But what happens is one-shots trainings aren't sustainable. And sometimes what happens is people look at putting systems in place and they get too complicated. They're too difficult to implement. They're not practical. We need practical suggestions for teachers so they can go back and start implementing these in the classroom. Let's not keep it a secret. Whether it's the good news game or the world peace game, whatever it is, there are practical solutions that we can implement to improve our classroom environment. So it has to be practical. It has to be sustainable. One-shot trainings, in my experience, don't hold. It's like teaching, someone long division once. It just doesn't work. This is complicated stuff. More complicated than it seems. And because I tend to be a bit of a data person, I think it's important to connect what we're doing to data in the school districts. So we can look at how effective our practices are. Is the training we're providing, are the supports we provide working? And what also happens is that when you connect the training that you're doing with some sort of data, it could be office referrals, it could be universal screening, it could be more sophisticated data with kids that have more difficult issues. It breathes some life into these initiatives. Otherwise, these initiatives are dealt with like a crisis. And we know that's a waste of resources. What happens when we implement these systems effectively? Well, what we did, this is a study we did a couple of years ago, where we looked at kids with severe emotional behavioral problems, and they were going through a process that we use with the kids. The kids here in the orange, these are the kids in, we'll refer to the B360, these are the kids in special ed with emotional behavioral problems. This is their scores on the reading, the math, state assessment. And then we have the average kid in special ed, the average kid's performance. Right here, it's the famous achievement gap. The kids with emotional behavioral problems tend to score significantly lower than any other group of students in our schools. But after a year being implemented through this process where we create dependable, caring, engaged environments, we saw a normalization of their achievement. And what we also saw, what's not out there, is the teachers that are more consistently dependable, caring, engaged, got even more pronounced results. So, what do I want you to walk away from today with? Go back to your schools and talk about behavior. Talk about improving classroom thinking, and remember, behavior matters.